This is your Freethinkers Report for Saturday, 3rd of October 2020. I am Ocean, and it is my great pleasure to welcome Greg Moffat to the Freethinkers team. Greg heads up Legalise Freedom, which is a great source of information covering all sorts of topics. So Greg is a really good interviewer, and I'm so pleased he has joined the team. So Greg, would you just like to sort of say a few words about yourself and Legalise Freedom?
Thank you very much, Ocean, for the kind introduction. I think you've more or less done that for me. But yeah, legalisefreedom.com is the website if anyone's interested. Legalise-freedom.com. You can spell legalise with an S or a Z, and anybody part of the Freethinkers group or interested in these similar topics will certainly find plenty of interest on the website. So thank you for that.
So shall we have a look at the survey? That's what we're going to talk about.
It is, yes. So I think first things first, for people who don't know, just explain what the survey is, because it's still ongoing, but you do have some results in.
Yes, it's still live, and it was really an opportunity to contact all my previous, well, I've got a huge email database of 700 emails, and I thought I'd just contact them as a way of engaging and introducing the Freethinkers channel. And the survey was about disclosure. And for me, disclosure is revealing a lot of the secrets that have been hidden from us for various reasons over time. And it's about time we got access to this information. Now, of course, there has been the WikiLeaks disclosure, but that's dribs and drabs. And the big issue that I wanted to know from people was, do people want to go for what's called full disclosure, where we just get everything in a huge data dump? Or do we go for the dribs and drabs, a bit here, a bit there, as we've been getting so far?
What was the remit of the survey? A lot of people will think of disclosure in terms of alien or ET activity or presence, and you mentioned WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, of course, that's a lot about governments, secret services, and what have you. So what was the actual scope of the disclosure?
Well, yeah. You're right to say that disclosure normally means the extraterrestrial involvement, and actually that's first on the list of the partial disclosure, because I set it into two different forms. You can either have full disclosure, in which case it's everything, including the extraterrestrials, or partial. But if it's partial, if the answer was partial, you then went to question 2, which was which of the particular ones, that I've got a sort of little list of them, would you select as the first one to go for? And what actually happened, the results, for those that are interested in the results, which is quite exciting, 50% of the people who responded said full disclosure. And that was my response.
So are you able to, or do you want to briefly go through those parameters that were, for example, the types of information?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's on the partial disclosure list. The partial disclosure would be, the first one, of course, is extraterrestrial involvement in human affairs. The second one was pedophilia and human trafficking, which is a fairly major one, and actually that was the one that most people went for on partial disclosure. Then there's deep state corruption, the sealed indictments and mass arrests, which is going to be huge when that happens. Technology such as free energy, and that's going to make such a big difference to the way we operate as a society. Vatican secrets, I just threw that one in, but nobody actually selected that one. Archaeological discoveries in Antarctica. This is a complete rewrite of our history, which is really interesting. What the discoveries in Antarctica, again, which we haven't been revealed yet, but that's going to be really interesting when that happens. The new financial system is the 7th option, which is a major change to the way our financial system works. Corruption in Big Pharma, including some of the vaccines. Corruption in telecoms, including 5G. And then I just put at the end, other. In fact, there were 2 other, you could have had full disclosure or partial disclosure or no disclosure, or for people who aren't awakened, not sure what disclosure means. So, and there were some people who did reply, not sure what disclosure means. That's fine. They're the ones that haven't woken up to what's going on yet. So I found it really quite interesting. I don't know what your answer was, Greg, if you took the survey.
Well, instinctively, I'm for full disclosure of any information in these fields that is available, but I realise it's also a complex issue. There's a lot of people who feel that full disclosure is like a big data dump would be an overload and would be overwhelming. And a lot of people who sit on secrets say that they do so because people can't handle the truth. So instinctively, I'm in favour of having things out in the open. But in order to get from a position of extensive secrecy, covert ways of doing things, to a more open society, I think you do have to do it in a controlled way. And I realise that's a contentious term. Who is going to control it? How are they going to control it? And people say it's already being controlled. We don't want that. But I think even the most benign situation, I think that if you drop too much information, you see this actually away from the realm of disclosure, too much information, too short a time, people can't assimilate it. And of course, many of the areas that are included in the survey here are areas that for many people are just purely in the realm of conspiracy. Nothing exists there are simply categories of nothing, so there's nothing to disclose, if you see what I mean. So if someone finds out that there is something there that's been hidden from them and their worldview is turned upside down, well, people don't deal with that particularly well, do they?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a big issue here how to handle this, because there is an awful lot of unawakened people still believing that everything's just fine, although the COVID situation and what's happening now, you just wonder what people are doing, because it's so obvious in your face that something not quite right with the official stories. But you're right about the full disclosure. While it's the most popular option, it is fraught with lots of problems. And my thought on it was, when I answered full disclosure, was, well, those are all sorted out. It might be horrendous for 6 months or something as we wade through all this information, and some of it is absolutely shocking. But that's what we need to do. We need to go through the apocalypse. The apocalypse means the great revealing, revealing the secrets, and that's what we need to do as society.
One thing that occurs to me is that so many of these areas, if not all of them, are interrelated in some way. So when you begin to effect disclosure in one area, quite often intentionally or otherwise, you begin to disclose that which is in another one of those categories. Exactly.
I mean, for example, the mass arrests. There are sealed indictments, so people can say, well, what are these things? And I agree that there haven't been the huge mass arrests yet. We do know Gitmo Bay has been refurbished, and there's a lot of people say there are already people down there. But there's over 100,000, I think, sealed indictments ready to go. It's a particular American thing, sealed indictments. But you could say the sealed indictments is also related to the other one, like deep state corruption or, corruption in Big Pharma. They could be involved in the mass arrests as well. So you're quite right. There is an interrelationship between the answers.
I mean, as unlikely as it seems, some researchers have documented quite thoroughly links between ET, extraterrestrial presence, and sexual abuse, pedophilia. And that seems quite a stretch for most people, but that link exists.
Oh yes, definitely. Well, the other thing about the survey answers is that when people went to partial disclosure, the top of the list was pedophilia and human trafficking, which also includes sex trafficking. And then new financial system technology and the deep state corruption. But nobody gave the extraterrestrial answer, which is surprising, isn't it?
It is rather. I wonder if that reflects just the preoccupations of our time. Some people possibly feel now that ET disclosure is something of a luxury when compared to deep state corruption or trafficking, child abuse, pedophilia, and what have you.
Yeah. The other one I'm particularly interested in, of course, is the new financial system, which is Nesara, Gesara. And it's difficult to tell whether that's just on the cards. It's been on the cards, it's going to happen next weekend or something, and it doesn't happen. And then you wait, there's some reason why it hasn't happened. And it's so frustrating, just keeps on going on and on and on. But the latest talk is just around the corner.
Have you read Richard Dolan's book, After Disclosure?
No, I haven't. That sounds an interesting one.
It's a few years old now, but it's basically how society would deal with large-scale ET disclosure. It's specifically about that because that's his area of research and expertise, but it's one that some of the listeners might be interested in, because I think that probably many of the points that he makes in his book about how societies would deal with something like that would also be applicable to some of these other survey items that you've mentioned, because a lot of the issues are the same, aren't they, when you're talking about releasing previously secret information? Yes,
that's right, yeah. In fact, the idea of this whole Freethinkers group came from when I met someone called Jeanette in Leeds on the exopolitics. And I do remember I think maybe someone like Richard Dolan was there, who did explain, this is about 4 or 5 years ago, the difficulties of disclosing extraterrestrials, because it's such a complicated issue. And there are so many different angles on it. But the ones I'm looking for, if we do get to extraterrestrial disclosure, would be the initiative by Valiant Thought, who met Eisenhower just after the war and tried to do a deal with the Americans whereby they would give up their nuclear weapons in exchange, well, it would be world peace, and they would get the new technology. But the Americans at that time were so frightened of the Russians that the military advised the president not to give up the weapons.
Well, there was also around that issue that at that time there were paranoid concerns that on both sides actually of the Iron Curtain that ET might be in fact just the other side in disguise, as it were.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I hadn't thought of that one.
Well, in terms of certainly in terms of craft, for example, UFOs. The idea was, some Americans were thinking this was secret Russian, black technology, and vice versa, really. So, and I think they thought that any approaches, any sort of interactions, like, are we sure? Of course, with ET, how could you ever be sure? But they were saying, are we simply returning messages to the opposition here, who are trying to put one over on us?
Yeah, it's difficult to tell because I wasn't there at the meeting, so. I imagine Valiant Thor did give some bona fides to reveal who he really was. And apparently they also had meetings with the Russians, and they tried to do the same thing, but nobody would agree. So basically that was one initiative that didn't work out that I do know. And of course, just recently I've been to Rendlesham, which is really interesting to see the famous case in the UK. So our equivalent to Roswell, basically. So, and that's definitely been covered up.
Yes, well, that, as you say, is one of the most famous, notorious UFO sightings, ET encounters, however you want to put it. People use different terminology, don't they, when they're describing these things. But however you want to put it, it was some kind of high strangeness encountered by those American servicemen there in the southeast of England, as it is.
Yep.
I think I spoke to you recently about living there for a while and the very strange energy in that forest area, which I lived next to.
Yeah, it's unusual that you live right next to one of the most famous ET sites. My take on it after reading various books on it is that it was a time travel.
Yes.
And so extraterrestrials could be actually humans from the future. Or us from the future, if you like.
Well, those are that's one of the most popular, if I can use that word, alternative explanations for ET encounters or phenomena. that do not involve kinetic explanations. That is to say, real craft, 3D craft existing in the 3D reality that you and I experience with our five senses, that it's something other than that, whether it's time travel, interdimensional, maybe some of historically, some of the non-material forces or beings like the Jinn, Archons, Watiko, all these age-old phenomena that have been spoken about down the eons, that our modern interpretation of them has been, to think of them in terms of extraterrestrials from other planets. That explanation for it only really coalesced in the 20th century, really, more or less from Roswell onward. Of course, there were ET and UFO sightings in the early 20th century that were also chalked up to an alien presence, but it's really after Roswell that it coalesced. So it's quite possible that we're dealing with something extremely ancient.
Yes, I think so. But you make a good point there. I think over time there's been enough information coming out that we can understand things now that perhaps we weren't able to understand, 20 or 30 years ago. And so the time is ripe for disclosure.
They also have, it appears to me, or it seems to me, that we were talking earlier about the disclosure items, on your survey, and how ET didn't fare very well, wasn't very popular. And I was saying about perhaps people feel that they've got other more pressing concerns at the moment. I'd be interested to know for those people who follow ET and UFO activity very closely, what the activity level is like at the moment, because there's some correlation historically with that sort of activity and human affairs, shall we say. This is well known, so I'd be quite interested to know where we're up to with that now. But equally interesting, as I say, that it wasn't a big concern for those who responded to the survey.
No, the main one was the pedophilia and human trafficking, and I have to agree with them, that has got to be revealed, and that's perhaps the most shocking of the revelations.
I think so. I think that's truly the dark side of who and what we are. Of course, there is, again, researchers and writers who have floated the idea that some of this activity it basically has a non-human dimension, that if we see or discover things that we feel are just beyond our horrors, beyond our imagining, that perhaps it may not be humans involved. It might be someone else.
I agree with you, and I think one way of trying to understand it is that we currently eat cows and sheep and so on, and we don't really think much about it, really. And maybe there's another being out there that, we're on the menu as well. And it's, for them, it's no big deal, because they're just eating another life form, like we eat other life forms.
Well, in the pantheon of explanations for our situation here on Earth, where we came from, why we're here, where we're going, and if you overlap that with evidence or lack of evidence for ET activity, interdimensional beings, other forces that we intuitively sense are out there, but our scientific measurement and methods are very poor at measuring or capturing them. Amongst these ideas are the idea of a prison planet. I'm sure many of the listeners will be familiar with this, that we're somehow quarantined here, to use a popular vernacular of the moment. That this is some kind of petri dish or lab, that we're basically an experiment. I personally have issues with any of those explanations, but they are out there and a lot has been written about them.
Yeah, I agree with you. One of the best ways of understanding it is we're an experiment. Actually, in a virtual reality, that's the big one. That's one day, maybe that'll be a subject for another discussion. But I do know you've interviewed Tom Campbell, and I was really impressed with that, because he's my hero in terms of virtual reality. He explains it very clearly.
Well, we can certainly explore that virtual reality concept in Tom Campbell's theory. It's not his alone. He's developed what he calls his big TOE, TOE, theory of everything. But, there's a lot of other researchers who are basically onto the same conclusion. But it's interesting to consider how, I know this is beyond the remit of the survey, but how all of these items, how all of these areas of potentially secretive information, how that changes or how they sit in the context of a virtual reality. Because some commentators I've seen, when speaking about the idea that we are living in some kind of simulation, that the material world is actually an illusion, it can be tempting to then go down that route of, well, none of this matters because it's somehow not happening. But I think that even if we are in some kind of virtual reality, what's happening here is still very important for us while we're here, in the same way that the events that take place in your dreams, be they good or bad or just funny, they seem very important to you at the time, if you see what I mean. So if you have a horrible nightmare about, being attacked by demons or something, then that matters intensely to you in that moment. It may be when you wake up that you can take a wider view of it, bird's eye view, and say, well, it matters less. But while we're in this reality, whatever it is, then all of these negative events, negative forces, negative tendencies, they do impact on us. We can't pretend that they don't.
That's right. So yes, I've tried to explain it in a book that I've written called My Way Zen, because I take sort of like a Zen angle on this, which is that it is illusory, but it matters because it's our evolutionary process, and that's the heart of what we why we're here in this experiment, if you like, or this prison planet, is to evolve.
Were there any you were slightly surprised by on this survey, ET disclosure not being really mentioned at all?
Yeah.
How did the survey's still live? People can find the link in the video description below. But so far, how much have the results fitted in with, or otherwise, with your expectations, or what you personally might like to see? Were there any?
I was pleased to see a lot of people, actually 50%, which is the highest score, was for full disclosure, one big data dump. And it's kind of like a bit of a revolutionary and tough one, but the people who have responded here, like myself, feel we're up for it. We can handle it. And to say the people can't handle it, I don't agree with that. I think we can.
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. That I suppose the issue is like if you go for partial disclosure, then you're trying to incrementally discover what people can handle. If you go for full disclosure, it's sort of trying to bolt the stable door, lock the stable door after the horse is bolted, if you see what I mean. If there was a lot of negative fallout from full disclosure, you'd then have another problem on your hands.
Yeah, people have said that it could lead to rioting in the streets, or extremely angry people when they realise they've been had. So yeah, it's going to be difficult. So we shall see what happens.
Well, the speaking about both ET and the child trafficking and pedophilia issue again, the big issue around ET disclosure was always that it would upend people's worldview, and they were particularly concerned with the religious worldview. So suddenly, what does the story of Earth's evolution, even if you take that scientific worldview, what does that mean then in the context of ET disclosure? What does the creation story turn into? What happens to God? What happens to heaven and hell and all these other religious concepts? What happens to the tenets of Islam, of Judaism, of Buddhism? What happens to all of it in the wake of ET disclosure? That was always the big concern. If you then apply that to the paedophilia and the institutionalized, systematized child abuse that we are only scratching the surface of, full disclosure on that, one of the big issues there for me personally is the number of people that it would involve. In the wake of the Jimmy Savile revelations, one thing that became clear was that there was many more people involved than most of us would like to imagine.
Yes, I agree with you. That's going to be the most shocking. You've got to remember, Ghislaine Maxwell is behind bars. So, and they've got her. When that testimony is going to be, it's going to be very interesting. Who was on that plane?
Yes, well, it'll also be interesting to see how far that's allowed to progress as well, because of course we've got recent real-world examples of people being silenced and not just bought off, but, you know, just mysteriously coming to harm.
Yes, it's going to be challenging. But I thought it was that if you put the link down below, then people can continue to fill in the survey, which I'm finding very interesting to see what people's views are.
Yes, well, yeah, as mentioned, links in the details below. Survey's still live. How long is that intended to run for, or is it open-ended?
Well, I might keep it going for another month or so, up till Christmas, shall we say, because I think by then we're going to have some, well, I think there's going to be a delay waiting for the election, and I think it's when Trump gets in, which will be confirmed January next year, I think that's the moment when the moves will be made to start running with some of these issues.
And of course, twist in the tale yet again that just today, as we speak, Donald Trump has been admitted to hospital, apparently with a COVID-19 infection, though he's in apparently just for observation and as a precaution. But events, as ever, continue to move apace. And really, this year, pandemic aside, things have moved so quickly, haven't they? And so many unexpected turns. And I think perhaps another review of the survey when it does conclude, perhaps at the end of the year, would be a good thing for us to do.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea. And we might just cover one or two of these items in other interviews. And that the plan is that you'll be able to interview other people in the Free Thinkers group, which will be very interesting, on nutrition, on common law, on various other areas that people, you know. And Rob would be particularly interested to talk about Rendlesham a bit more. He's a bit of an expert on that.
Okay, of course, and Rob you're referring to as part of the Free Thinkers group. So, well, I think that's a relatively good survey of the survey, if I can put it like that, Ocean. So perhaps you'd like to maybe sign off and do your final bits of information sharing with listeners?
Yes, okay. So thank you very much for listening, and please subscribe and and press the bell so you get notifications when we put the next Free Thinkers reports up on the air. So thank you. Just thank you, Greg, for joining the team. I'm really pleased because it's so much easier to talk to someone rather than talking to camera.